countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And that is why Batman will always prefer stuffing over potatoes. Any objections? Okay then, moving on. Now it's time to rank all the X-Men teams by which one had the best hairdos. And
I think the fact that he wouldn't budge an inch on that OMAC issue was insane. I mean, that wasn't even a key.
Yeah, it was OMAC. I mean, who is out there clamoring for issues of OMAC in 2020? What year is this?
Andy, oh, thank God you're back.
Hey, how's the shop been holding up there, J.A.? Are you okay?
Yeah, what is that smell? Is that the same Conan the Barbarian shirt you were wearing when we left?
Yeah, and that pizza over there isn't supposed to look like that either. Unless you're trying to discover some new antibiotic or something?
You guys don't know what it's like. Nobody came to the shop since you guys go to those Comic Cons. Not Mikey, not Ethan, not George. I even had a sign promising free chocolate egg creams with every comic book purchase, and still nobody came.
Did you mention that they didn't have eggs in them?
Well, what does that matter?
Well, I mean, come on.
I can't tell you how many times I resorted Atlantis Attacks. Tell me at least you have some interviews I can listen to.
Now, I'm curious, are you going by title or are you going by the storyline?
It's all right, though. Okay. But I know you've been going crazy. So, you know what? I think we have some past interviews we got from the Hershey Comic Con that we went to this past summer on the Archive Rama 3000. How about I'll fire those up and we'll listen to that?
Not that piece of junk. It can't even make a decent cheese pizza anymore.
Well, that's your problem. It's not made to make cheese pizzas. It's supposed to play interviews. Look, why don't we go downstairs and I'll fire up some of these interviews and we'll listen to them, right? We interviewed Roy Thomas there, for Pete's sake.
Maybe it just needs a bit of WD-40.
Rubbish. It's just temperamental. See, look. Hey, fired on. Perfectly fine for me. I don't know what your problem is. Any case, so the first interview I have for everybody on today's program is an interview we did with Joe Staton, a fantastic comic book artist, which for you, J.A., is a real treat because I think he drew the issue of Silver Surfer that made you a Silver Surfer fan, right?
Yes, Volume 3, Issue 14.
Yeah. Was only one of 3 issues of Silver Surfer that he actually drew, but he drew so much other great stuff, and we're going to hear all about that on this interview from Hershey Comic Con with Joe Staton. Hey, we're back here at the Last Comic Shop, and we're talking with Joe Staton. And Joe, I've been a fan of your work for so long, and you're a marvelous artist, and oftentimes in the Last Comic Shop, I always like to talk about how folks get involved in the comic book industry, but I always like to start off by asking, were you a comic book fan growing up? Is that why you wanted to do comic books, I guess?
Oh yeah. I best I can tell, I have always been a comics fan. There's a family story, which I repeat a lot, that I was found when I was 3 years old. I was found in the kitchen, on the floor, trying to trace Dick Tracy out of the comic strips. So my ambition to draw comics goes back at least that far.
Wow. And that seems to be a common thread among a lot of artists that I've talked to, is like the notion when they were younger of tracing. So, other than Dick Tracy, did you trace anybody else back in the day to kind of get a sense of your style?
Well, I traced the Phantom a lot.
Okay.
And Little Abner. I loved Al Cap.
Oh, yes. Was that Bob Lubbers, or was he drawing at the time, or was it?
May have been Frazetta. Yeah.
Okay.
And Pogo. I was very big on Pogo.
So do you happen to remember your first comic book? Like, you talked about strips, but do you remember getting a comic book or one of your first comic books you ever got?
It's kind of impossible to say which ones would have been my very first
right.
comic. But I know that when I was still pretty young, I was following Dell Comics, especially the Westerns. And Alberto Giolitti, I found out later was drawing a lot of those westerns, Wells Fargo and Paladin and that sort of thing. But I think I actually learned to read. My father would have me reading through Superboy.
Okay.
So I very much remember early issues of Superboy. Can't say it's the first, but it goes back a ways.
So that was what Otto Bender was. I think he was doing it.
And John Cicala.
Okay.
I think was doing the ones that I remember.
Okay, sounds good. Well, eventually you wanted to take that kind of love of comics and comic strips and drawing, and you wanted to, I guess, make a career out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what, I guess, brought you from just being a fan of, I guess, comics to saying, you know what, I might want to draw comics? Or was it one of those things where it's just like, I need to make a living and there's no way to do it? But some people, it's like, no, I want to draw comics, I guess. So what's your story from that?
Well, I think at some point, Julie Schwartz had letter columns in his comics, JLA and such like. And reading those, the answers, I realized somebody was answering things. There were people in there and actually making the books.
Right.
So, and I came along at a time there was a lot of activity in fanzines.
Okay.
Science fiction and comics, and I
Right.
did a lot of drawing for those when I was still in school and teenager and such like. So I got accustomed to drawing for publication with even if the printing wasn't so elaborate for mimeographs and that sort of thing.
Right.
But that was the first experience of drawing for publication or drawing to demand. When I came along, there weren't schools for comics, and there wasn't the access you have now. But I studied art in college, and I felt like I would have given up if I didn't make a shot at getting into comics one way or another. It was fallback position. I was going to be either a newspaper reporter or an art history professor.
Okay.
So those were my options, which would have been fine.
Which would have been fine, but
we
would have all missed out on wonderful years of these wonderful drawings. But I'm kind of glad you didn't go that route. But I was always wondering when I talk to sometimes with artists. Oftentimes artists talk about almost like serving under apprenticeships when they would get places, because they would always have somebody that was working in the industry before them, where they would learn certain things. Like maybe they were good at drawing almost like pinup things, but like using the white space, using the page to tell a story. Did you have any mentors when you first broke into the industry, or folks that had been doing it for a while that like kind of took you under their wing and kind of showed you the ropes of how to work within comics and the medium?
Well, I guess my real connection to comics was when I was still in doing science fiction fanzines.
Okay.
Danny Atkins was one of Wally Wood's main assistants.
Yes.
Was connected to the science fiction stuff, so I would hit him up with questions about what's really going on and what should I be prepared for, and he was very helpful. When I got into comics, I worked for a while as Gil Kane's assistant, so I had a similar approach to breaking a page down that Gil did.
Right.
So we meshed that way. So I guess those would be my basic.
How was working for Gil? I mean, Gil's an interesting character from some of the stories I hear. And now you can say as much or as little as you want, but how were the years working as Gil Kane's assistant?
Actually, I think I worked for him a little over a year.
Okay.
So it wasn't that long. And for the true insight, you'll have to speak to Howard Chaykin. I'm sure he'll be glad to break it down for you. But I had a great time with Gil, trying to mesh with Gil's art. Right. So the thing was, I was basically breaking the pages down so that he could just take them and finish the figures a bit. And there are some of Gil's comics that straight my stuff. So, he turned them in. We were fine. And, Gil still owes me money,
it's amazing. You're talking about Gil Kane. You're talking about Dan Atkins. We just talked with P. Craig Russell, and he's actually Dan got him into the industry as well. Because
cool.
Dan had opened up a studio in Ohio, and he was one of the folks that he brought into the show. So it's interesting that you also have that connection to Dan Atkins. So
yeah, and I was just at another show. I was talking to Steranko, who was. Came in through connections to Dan. So there's a whole underground Dan Atkins network that most people aren't really. But with Gil, I did Spider-Man and Ghost Rider and even a Conan, and which had the way I laid it down, there wasn't a lot of detail, and Gil told me, "Don't worry about it. It's going to the Philippines. It'll come back with detail." So,
was that Alfredo Alcala? Was he working on that or no?
It may very well have been him.
Because he's the first Filipino person that I think of that was working on Conan. So he did a lot of the inks for John Buscema and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I want to quickly pivot to your work on E-Man, because eventually later on, decided to come and do your own creator project and stuff. So tell me the story about E-Man. For those folks that may not know about E-Man, for the younger fans out there, how did you get involved with that project?
My first break into comics was at Charlton Comics, and actually on my honeymoon. I stopped. My wife insists that I make this a key part of my origin story. We were broken and taking a very quick honeymoon to Mystic, Connecticut, and between Brooklyn, where we were, and Connecticut. So it was Derby, Connecticut, the home of Charlton Comics. I just happened to bring my portfolio along, and we stopped in at Charlton on the way, and I got work. Okay. So they didn't pay well. They were the bottom of the barrel.
True, but you were. What was the first book that you did at Charlton? Because you did a lot, so that's why I was just curious.
I did a lot. There is some question. I'm not. I generally credit an issue of Ghost Manor.
Okay.
But it's possible that the first thing I actually did was a 3-page romance. I think they may have given me that.
Okay.
And they decided I didn't have the finesse for romance, but I was just fine for something a little rougher like horror.
Okay.
So it was one of those.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're working at Charlton, and eventually, that's where E-Man came out at. So I guess what's the story of how you went from just doing whatever they would sign you, and now you're on E-Man? How did that all come about?
That came about when Sal Gentili was the editor when I hired on, and George Wildman was his assistant. But when Sal retired and George became the main editor, he needed an assistant, so he hired Nicola Cuddy, and here we got the connections again. Nick was one of the assistants for Wally Wood.
Okay.
It's all Dan Atkins, Wally Wood. I mean, this everything comes out of that.
It seems like it. Yeah, it's like these puzzle pieces I'm fitting together.
Comes out of that vortex.
Yes.
So Nick had learned to write comics and to draw comics working for Wally Wood.
Okay.
And while he was editing at Charlton, he was also writing a lot of horror stories, but his horror was very humane. There was always something sweet about it, and we hit it off very well. There was a similar approach to things, and Nick convinced Charlton that he should be allowed to go ahead with a character he had called E-Man. And since I had worked very well with Nick, he called me up, told me his ideas for E-Man, and I convinced him to change the origin a little bit.
Okay.
And from then we were on, and it worked out very well.
On E-Man, did he write full scripts, or was it more of a Marvel method, or how did you guys work together?
It was the way he learned at the foot of Wally Wood.
Okay.
Which is you take a blank piece of paper, you draw 6 boxes on it, and you put little stick figures in it
Okay.
with captions. And that was the way we worked.
Okay, so he would give you that as your template for what you were supposed to do, and then you just went from there.
It worked as well as any other way.
And I guess that's the one question is, as an artist, when you're working on things, do you prefer to have a little more of that, I guess, creative input where you get more of like a, how do I say it, more of a blank canvas to work with, that they give you like some, or would you rather have things kind of more scripted out, I guess? I don't know.
It strictly depends on the project and on the writer. I'm generally annoyed by writers who want to talk everything out.
Okay.
But I like to have enough that I know what I'm expected to do.
Okay.
And sometimes that can be Marvel method. Sometimes I once had a script from Marty Pasco that was 100 pages of type script for a 20-page comic. So, but.
What did you do with that? Did you give it back to him and say like, no, this isn't going to work?
I drew it.
Oh, you drew it. All right, never mind then.
And on the other hand, I once had a Plastic Man script from Len Wein,
Okay.
which it was probably a 10-page story, but it was like three paragraphs he wrote on a napkin at lunch. So that's you
So
could,
you've run the gamut from
you
a
could-
cocktail napkin to a.
right.
I still can't get over like that many page for a 22-page story. Oh man, what was he writing? War and Peace?
It was when E-Man came back at First Comics, Marty was the writer there,
Right.
And it was his first E-Man script. It was amazing. It was very
It was very dense.
Yes, right. It was dense. Yes.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time today, sir, but the last question I had for you is, if you were to say like what your proudest accomplishment is in the field of comics, whether it was a particular issue or run or something.
I'm curious too. Is there work? Because you've run the gamut in comics. You've worked on superheroes, on licensed books. You've been doing. You do Classics Illustrated. I have that Christmas Carol version. Now you're working on Dick Tracy's strips. Is there a work that you've done that you feel like, I don't know if it got the attention it deserved? It really, do you think should see more light?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I did some Legends of the Dark Knight that were inked by a Argentinian inker, Horacio Attalini.
Okay.
Which is looks like storyboards for a pulp magazine.
Oh.
It's beautiful work, and I'm really proud of it. And what Horacio did made it, even nicer. So much nicer.
Okay.
I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of a Batman book of opposing landmines
Right.
that Bill Sienkiewicz. Really pleased with that, and I'm really pleased with my Christmas Carol.
Yes, your Christmas Carol is very well.
Yeah. So I guess there are like 4 or 5 things that I'm really pleased with. So
Okay.
I think I have actual credits for something like 1,500 comics. So 5 out of that I could point to with pride.
Okay. My last question is whether or not there were any particular writers or inkers or folks in the comic book industry that you felt you really gelled with. Like, these were the people that, like, if there was a dream team, I would always want to be this person being inking my work or this person writing my stuff. What was your most pleasant experience like that, I guess?
Again, it's hard to pick
Just one.
but figure like 5 or so. Well, certainly with Nick on E-Man.
Yes.
I loved working with Steve Englehart on Green Lantern. He always surprised me with what we're doing. I don't know. Alan Brennert and Paul Levitz on the Earth 2 stuff.
Okay.
When Huntress and we did the romance with Batman and Catwoman.
Yes.
I really seemed like I understood that. And I always want to throw in that I think Charles Dickens is one of the best comics writers I ever collaborated with.
Yes, from the Christmas Carol.
Yes,
you would be remiss in leaving out Charles Dickens.
Yes.
So. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for taking some time to talk with us at the Last Comic Shop. Make sure that you're checking out any of the wonderful comic books that he just mentioned. I'm going to be trying to find those issues of Legends of the Dark Knight because honestly, that was one that flew under my radar. So But thank you so much for just taking a few moments with us, and we hope that you continue drawing for many years to come.
Okay, and be sure to check in with Howard Chaykin.
Well, that was a great interview with Joe Staton. I noticed that you didn't mention any Silver Surfer, though, so maybe not such a great interview. I don't know. Anyway,
I forgot to even mention about the Kilowog. I should have said something about the Green Lantern work.
Anyways, we are going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we've got another interview from the sweetest place on earth.
Hey, it's Mikey Wood, frequent Last Comic Shop guest and collector. And as a collector, I'm always in need of boards, bags, long boxes, and more to house all those comics. That's why I use promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off my orders at bcwsupplies.com. Not only does it get me a discount on BCW's already low prices, but I know using LCSPOD at checkout is another way I can show my support to the Last Comic Shop podcast in their continuing mission to bring fans together under that big comic book tent. So if you're in need of comic book supplies, head out to bcwsupplies.com and use promo code LCSPOD today. That's LCSPOD.
You know what I think? This world we're in right now is the fairy tale. And what's really real is on the other side.
Ramsey, mechanic by day, aspiring comic book creator by night, went into the woods and tripped. He was bombarded by bizarre and mysterious glyphs that he drew into his sketch pad and onto the body of his muse, Regina.
Oh, groovy! Your art is crawling all over me.
Shit. What is going on with you?
What's going on with you? All of a sudden, you're a complete drip, baby. Maybe you need another limb to the head. Ah!
Bloom, written and created by Ted Sikora, with art by Butch Mappa.
How are you feeling, Ram Man?
You've never experienced a story so astonishing, so far out and away from the beaten path.
Where in the am I?
Blast off with Bloom, the origin of a prophet. Order yours at herotomorrow.com.
Hey, we are here joined today with Scott Hanna, one of the most prolific inkers of all time.
Yes, yes. And you know how we love to talk with inkers and pencilers and writers on the Last Comic Shop. And one of the questions we always like to ask them before we talk about their work is how they got into comics, right? I'm sure that you were a comic book fan growing up, or at least remembered maybe the first comic book that really grabbed your attention. As a kid, what was that comic book? Do you remember?
Well, the first superhero comic I remember, because when I was very little, my parents wouldn't let me buy superheroes. It was like Casper the Friendly Ghost and Richie Rich and Donald Duck, things like that, right? I think I was 10 years old about when I finally got my first superhero book. And as a kid, you have a very limited supply of funds.
Right.
So I was like, okay, what book has the most superheroes in it that I can fit? So it was a Justice League of America was my first superhero comic book because it had Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Flash, all of them were in the same book.
Was it an
all
80
in costume.
page or 100 pager?
No, it was I couldn't even afford those. Those were like a whole $1 or something at the time. You know? I'm old, so I've been at this for a while.
I was curious. Do you remember the issue number at all?
I'm horrible at remembering issue numbers,
okay.
But I remember what the cover looked like, even though eventually it got torn off because I read it so much.
Okay, what did the cover look like? Do you remember?
It was actually, I think it was like a big hand holding a box, and the heroes were all in the box. It was some weird cosmic thing, but I loved actually a lot of the early stories, they had the Justice League teaming up with the Justice Society.
Yes.
So that even more heroes, you know? So I was like, wow, double the amount of heroes in here. This is great, you know? So as a kid, I loved the Avengers and the Justice League. And then I started getting down to like my two favorites, which were Spider-Man and Batman.
Okay.
So, but I had to work my way up to those guys.
Right. Well, speaking of working your way through comic books, the next question I always have is, like, again, started off as a comic book fan, but at one point you wanted to decide you wanted to actually do comics, right? I mean, so how did you make that leap from fan to...
Well, weirdly enough, even though I grew up drawing and reading comics, I never thought it was a real job.
Okay.
So when I went to art school, I majored in illustration. I thought I was going to do like book cover paintings and album covers, and I did some of that. But when I got out of school and I was doing some of that kind of just normal illustration work, it was like, this is work. You know, it wasn't, you go to art school thinking you're going to have a fun job. And when it starts being too much work, it's not fun, you know, and doing book covers is not the same as doing comic book covers, because, you know, books can be interesting or not, you know, whatever. And it's still just a lot of work for just one image. So after trying other forms of illustration for a while, I got back into comics. And actually, some friend of mine from school said, hey, Scott, we know a comic book inker who actually needs an assistant. And so I actually worked for him for about 6 months, because even though I'd gone through 4 years of art college, nobody ever told me how to draw comics, right? They didn't even tell me how to do sequential storytelling. They just told you how to do a picture, right? So I had to learn the specifics about comics, and I grew up with them, so I knew about them.
Sure.
After working with him, I actually got recognized by a small independent publisher that did black and white comics. They hired me to pencil and ink monthly title. I found out that I was good at it, and they actually paid me for it. And nice. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so when I first started working in comics, I was like, okay, it's fun now. As long as it stays fun, I'll keep working in comics. When it stops being fun, I'll do other forms of illustration.
Right.
37 years later, I'm still drawing comics. So that means I'm still literally having fun with it.
You brought up an interesting point about kind of learning the business. And so we talk to artists all the time, and a lot of them have mentors, and it's almost like an apprenticeship, somebody that shows them the ropes, especially artists, because again, they talk about it being like a blank slate, like a clean page, and it's like, how do you tell the story within those boxes? How do you make it flow from one panel to the next? Did you have any mentors in that regard, either, in those early days?
Unfortunately, no. My mother's a fine artist, so I learned how to paint and draw when I was quite young, but I drew traditionally and painted in oils and stuff. Basically, all my process of storytelling was learning from reading comics for years and studying them, watching movies like crazy. I study movie making, and I have for the past 50 years or whatever. And then once I got into the business, because I chose to focus more on inking instead of penciling, I learned from the masters, because I got to work with John Romita Jr., I got to work with John Byrne, I got to work with the great writers, and I learned so much more of how to tell a good story from working with those people. So my mentors were my professional partners.
Right.
It wasn't I was trained by Will Eisner. I was like, no, I just got to work with John Romita Sr. and Jr. It's like I got to, so all those guys. And after working for decades with some of the very best storytellers in the business, unless I'm a total idiot, it's going to sink into my brain. And one of the cool things working with partners is I try to learn all the good things, but I also learn what not to do. So if I work with a bad partner, I'm like, okay, what are they doing wrong? Why is it wrong? Why is it not working? So I'm a very analytical artist. So I really study and I pay attention. And I've had many artists where okay, I don't like the results. I'm going to avoid doing those mistakes. Okay. I like these results. I'm going to learn how to replicate those things. And that's how you get better. And my philosophy in art is that until I die, I want to keep improving.
And you do wonderful work. Now, most recently, we've been seeing your work on Amazing Spider-Man with John Romita Jr.
Correct.
I love John Romita Jr. He has a very certain flavor. What are some things about working with John Romita Jr. that you do to help accentuate his work and bring out the best in somebody his caliber?
So one of the things I love, John was trained by his father, and in the early days of comics, we didn't have super tight pencilers where nowadays a lot of pencilers are like, I'm going to put every single mark and scritch and line in there, and the inker just has to trace exactly what I did. And that's not really how it's supposed to work. Originally, the penciler concentrated on the storytelling, and the inkers, like Stan Lee called us embellishers,
right?
Because the inker's job was to finish the artwork and complete it and make it print worthy. And because John was trained by his father, he's not as loose as his dad was. He definitely gives me a lot of information, but he expects his art partner to further it. So I love when he does a lot of like gray tones, and he'll just do kind of the side of the pencil, right? Okay. And he'll just fill it in gray. And an inker will get that. It's like, wait, does that mean it's supposed to be black? Is it supposed to be gray? What kind of gray? And then he'll do some black marks on top of that. It's like, wait, is that a black on a gray or is that a white on a black? It's like, when I first started working with John, I was like, John, what do you mean by it? He's like, oh, it's up to you. I'm like, oh, cool. I get to make these decisions and not get yelled at or anything, you know? And especially over the years, John and I have gotten to really trust each other. We know what we're doing, but we just did literally yesterday. I was working on this gorgeous double page splash he has of like all these heroes on a rooftop looking down over this big battle scene thing, and John did this really nice underlighting and this like these bricks and building structures behind him. And again, he kind of did them all dark, and I'm like, and it's supposed to be a night scene. It's like, so okay, I could just do this as black, or I could do this as grays. And if I'm doing as grays, what value of grays and what technique of grays? So I started doing like cross hatching in some areas and white spatter on black in other areas. And it turned out great, but it was all because he gave me all the starting information I needed, but he lets me run with it and participate. Absolutely. So John's one of the best partners I've had, because he doesn't call me his inker, he calls me his art partner. And that's how I look at him, is he's my partner in the end result. It's really a total collaboration between both of us.
Is that your preferred method of working? Like, would you rather have a penciler that kind of gives you a little more freedom to kind of put your own personal stamp on things?
Yeah, because I'm a very solid artist myself. I know how to color, I know how to draw, I know how to pencil. So the more opportunity I have to use my strengths, the better. So yes, I am technically an excellent, just straight up inker that I can do really, really precise, tight, super clean pencil work and translate it to inks. But I love doing what's called finishes, where I get a rough pencil drawing. I get to decide where the shadows go, where the blacks go, where the textures go. That's my most fun part, because it's really using much more of my drawing skill as well as my inking skill.
Absolutely. And so it's almost like you would prefer almost like layouts almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked many times with just getting, sometimes I get like, okay, there's a circle here that's Batman, there's a circle here that's Robin, and then I get to fill in the whole costume. And if I didn't have the script, I would have no clue what was going on. That doesn't happen often, but when I get that, it's no problem, because I just do my thing.
You have professionals like you and the artists that you're working with. Those collaborations oftentimes can bring out the best all involved. And
one of the reasons I when I chose to become specialized in inking, I didn't want to make myself the star. My job is to make the penciler look as good as they can possibly look. So if I do that properly, I might get some attention, but my job is to make them look good. And I use all my skills not to flatter myself, but to flatter them.
It's an underappreciated profession for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many times when folks will be like, "Oh, I love that book because of so and so's pencils," and you don't realize that it's the inker.
But yours is the last line that the audience is going to see in the final product.
Well, the ink work is what gets printed. The pencil work gets erased. Right. So one of my jobs is to fix mistakes, fix anatomy, because that's what gets printed. You know, we got to make sure it looks finessed all the way to get to that printed page.
Now, I wanted to ask you about the process of inking. It is becoming an endangered art at some point with some of the digital.
Well, The good and the bad thing is that digital has made inking much, much easier for the layman.
Okay.
So in reality, it literally takes years of practice to master like a brush and a quill pen. Okay.
Absolutely.
To get it to act properly. And it's just the mechanics of controlling your hand and eye to make the tools do what you want.
And that doesn't even
count
for-
the knowledge
Exactly.
of what you're doing with those tools. So to be a traditional inker literally takes years of mastery. Digital, you can always have an undo button or an erase button. You can actually move things. So a lot of people have gotten much, they get similar results without nearly as much effort or skill involved. But unfortunately, in my mind, that makes a lot of artists lazy because I worked in every medium, right? I'm a painter, I'm a penciler, I'm an inker, and I consider inking the hardest because traditional inking, you have to make every stroke perfect.
Yeah, you're working without a net.
Right, exactly. You're working on a tightrope without a net. So I never liked white out or clean. I was like, you got to get it right the first time. Got to have total control. Every mark has to mean something and be there for a reason. Nowadays with digital, they're working with a net all the time.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I can just bounce back. I can undo that. I can move that over. I can clean that up or whatever. And it usually actually makes it take twice as long because they're not doing it right the first time. You know, if you got to redo it 10 times, you just lost 20 minutes, you know?
And like we were saying earlier, you have that collaborative process with the artists that
Right.
you're working with. And, you know, the more people you have working on it,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know, the more people cleaning it up and making it great.
And one of the other difficulties, like part of the partnership of art is actually one of the benefits. Making the collaboration makes every person stronger.
Exactly.
When a lot of artists, because of digital, they're like, oh, I can ink myself. But generally what they do is they magnify their own flaws. So they don't have somebody to fix them or improve it or to tweak it in a way to make it better. They're actually just magnifying all their own weaknesses. And they're like, why does it look worse when I ink it? It's like, you're not working with another partner as that different insight.
It's not so much one person's vision, to your point. Like when you have a penciler do all the pencils and then do the inks, it's that one solid vision. So you don't get like the chance for there to be a little bit of conflict.
Yeah, and
not that that can't be good, but
right. But a lot of times that interaction actually improves the product because, like I said, my goal is to make the pencilers work better. Hopefully the colorist is going to make my black and white work better. And each of us together comes up with a magic that no one of us can do all by ourselves. Or we could, but it would take months or whatever. I liken it to a rock band. Like you can have the best musician in the world who can write and sing and play every instrument, but it's not the same as when they get the right guitarist and the right drummer and the right lyricist and they get them all together. This magic happens that excels beyond their solo work frequently. And that's kind of the way it works in comics.
Now, I was curious too. You have had a long and varied career. It's harder to name a character that you haven't inked.
Right.
More so than one that you have. Do you have any work that you've done that you feel like didn't get the attention or seems like it slipped under the radar? You like that you really hope that people would give it a second look?
Okay, so one of the guests at this show is Roy Thomas, and I worked with him a few times in my career. This is an undersung comic issue I did. It was actually the Black Knight, and Roy Thomas created the character of the Black Knight, or at least the more modern version of the character. And this was actually, we were doing the medieval Black Knight, and then at one of the splash pages we had all the different incarnations of the character. But I grew up loving like Robin Hood and King Arthur and all that stuff. So doing a superhero set in King Arthur's court with Merlin and the original Black Knight and stuff. And I was doing it with Tom Grummett, and I was doing, again, the finishes thing where I was just going to town with it and making it look like Hal Foster from Prince Valley and stuff. And it turned out spectacularly. Like every page is just a gem, and nobody really noticed it, you know? But I think actually Roy wanted to, he actually got one of the original pages because he loved it so much. But yeah, most fans were just like, okay, it was like a Black Knight story, who cares? But for me, I was like, it was a gorgeous issue. It just turned out so beautifully well. And Tom Grummett, who's the penciler, and I both consider that one of our favorite jobs together of all the times we worked together. That it was called Major Arcana Black Knight, and it was part of a miniseries, but it was just a one issue, and it just turned out spectacularly well.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't seen it, so I'm going to have to go and dig that up. So, okay, we appreciate your time so much. Before we go, I have one last question, just that you've been working on Spider-Man books continuously with very few breaks in between. Do you have a particular Spider-Man story or run that stands out for you?
So far, I mean, I have been working on the character for 30 years this year. By far, my favorite run was when I was working with J. Michael Straczynski as the writer and John Romita Jr. as the penciler on Amazing. And of that run, the most special issue by far is what we call the Black issue, Amazing Spider-Man 36, because it dealt with a real-world event, and I lived in New York for many years. John grew up in New York, so it was a very, very personal issue. It was dealing with a real tragedy that we all knew and shared in, and so to me, and John Romita Jr. said the same thing, that is the most important issue either of us has ever done in our careers.
And you guys put that out in record time, too.
We actually, Straczynski wrote the entire script in like a weekend, and John and I I think we did the pencils and inks in something like a 30-day period, and it was out because we didn't want it to be out 3 months after the event, you know? So we jumped ahead and did it as soon as but we really poured our heart and soul into it. If you look at the detail in it, it's just insane. We were looking at reference all over the place. We were seeing, and we were almost like crying while we were doing it because we were like, oh, these people died. This is real. This isn't made up comic book wreckage. Right. This is real wreckage. You know?
And that's a super powerful issue. And as a Spider-Man guy, you see that in every retrospective, you see the double page spreads, and that's work that's going to live forever. And you guys just did such a wonderful job with such a sensitive topic,
right?
So,
and we wanted to treat it with respect, not take advantage of it or anything like that.
Right, it didn't feel exploitive,
right? Yeah.
So, thank you so much for your time today, Scott. Where can folks find you, like nowadays? Like if you're a new comic book fan, you're going out to a local comic book shop. What are you working on?
Well, I'm currently working on Amazing Spider-Man. That's my main gig. I'm also working on the Spider-Man India miniseries, which the first issue just came out a couple weeks ago. I'm doing a couple of what-if stories for Marvel. I did a really cool Loki story written by Walter Simonson about like the fall of Asgard and stuff. I'm actually just got assigned a new project through Marvel, which is a what-if Tomb of Dracula story. Oh, wow. And I love the classics like Dracula. So, and I just did a Venomverse story. So far this year, I haven't worked on DC yet, but I usually work for both companies. And I'm also doing a cool project, which is a Kid in a Comic, which is a newspaper, like a Sunday supplement newspaper that can be found in comic book stores or online. And I have a creator-owned comic strip in there called Dodge and Hustle that I co-write, pencil, and ink.
Wow.
And that's actually coming out, I think, 7 times a year.
And it's absolutely gorgeous. If you ever have an opportunity to pick it up at a local comic book shop, I would highly recommend it. It kind of reminds me of that Wednesday comics series.
Exactly, yes.
The DC put out several years ago. And I love that idea. Like, man, that is originality in a comic book shop. I love it. Scott, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us on The Last Comic Shop.
Make
sure that you're checking out all of Scott's wonderful work throughout the years. He is so prolific that I'm sure that if you go through any box, anywhere, you'll find at least
there's a running joke that if you've read comics in the past 35 years, you have to have a lot of books of mine in your collection. You pretty much is almost unavoidable. I think so far I've done over 23,000 pages of interior artwork for Marvel and DC.
Goodness.
And I'm still working.
Well, keep up the great work, sir. Thank you so much.
Many, many years to come. Thank you so much for being on The Last Comic Shop.
All right. Well, that was Talking with Scott Hanna, and we will be right back with more of The Last Comic Shop with our final interview of the day right after these commercial breaks. It's Mikey Wood chatting with his good pal, Howard Chaykin. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, Brian Thomas here from the former The Batman vs. James Bond show and the upcoming The Night Cave show. Do you like noir, black and white gritty murder mysteries? Do you like crime stories or even pulp comics? Then you're gonna love Nick Palatichuk's debut graphic novel entitled The Greenway. It's 1968, and Butch Schultz, a black market merchant, finds that his friend has been murdered in a mansion in St. Paul. Now he is out looking for who did it, while the city's best detectives are on the case. Nick's graphic novel is already getting rave reviews, let me tell you. Zero Supervision Comics podcast says, a dark, intriguing story that makes you want to know more. The Glenn Thinks Stuff podcast says, it's explosive, captivating, and alluring. And actor Kyle Hester from The Chair, Zombie with a Shotgun, and Preacher 6 says, can't wait for this book. You gotta get on this. Order your copy today at Indie Planet, A New World of Comics. That's www.indieplanet.com. Hard copies and digital copies are available, and now digital copies are only $5. That's where I said it, just $5. So make sure you order yours today.
And so before this next one starts, we need to let you guys know that our pal Mikey Wood, not only is he an awesome individual, he is also the mayor of any Comic-Con we go to. You take Mikey to a con, he is making friends left and right with the hotel staff, with the bartenders. Honestly, everywhere he goes, Mikey is making friends. And nowhere has that paid off more than his relationship with industry legend Howard Chaykin. Sure, you can go and listen to other interviews with Howard Chaykin where he will talk about his illustrious career and his disdain for Star Wars. Not this one. I mean, you get a little bit of that in this one. But here, you get Mikey and Howard Chaykin in an interview that is unlike any other. And spoiler alert, there might be some show tunes involved.
We're talking amongst old friends here. Anyway, hey, it's Mikey Wood from The Last Comic Shop talking again with Mr. Howard Chaykin here at Hershey Comic-Con. It's, I believe, 2023. So we talked a little bit about your prior work in the 70s, and then between that and American Flagg, there seems to be a stylistic leap.
Well, let's face it, in the 1970s, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was trying to figure out an approach, because I had no point of view. Well, I take it back. I had a point of view, but I had none of the skill set to express that point of view. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I didn't understand that there was a language to the work that I was doing that was outside of my grasp of understanding. One of the things that I did when I left comics in the late 70s, early 80s to work elsewhere was I figured out that there was this language that I just would study. I woodshed it, and I figured out that there was a way for me to synergize the textual ambitions I had with the visual ambitions that I had. And what that ultimately boiled down to was learning how to show and tell at the same time, to find text and imagery that work together as opposed to one supporting the other, that they were a synergistic unit. And that's really what became my main goal professionally from the time I was 32 on until this day. So we're talking 40 years of work committed to that idea.
And with Flagg, your letterer had a lot to do with that. Now, was he part of the equation from the beginning, or was that someone you stumbled onto?
No,
okay.
Anecdotally, I've known Ken since the early 70s. He was an assistant to Storanko, and I was part of the Neil Adams posse. And we didn't like each other very much. And when I was in the early 80s, when I committed to do Flagg, I was up at Marvel, and I was who can I get to do this? I'd never hired anybody, and Joe Duffy recommended that I talk to Brucenak, who just shown them his samples, and I knew Ken. I called him up, and for some reason, which to this day, we clicked in a way that is transcendent. We were on exactly the same page, and his ambitions were realized in this. And from that point on, the book, use that word again, the synergy that existed between the two of us in this book was what sold the book. It also confounded people because it did not look like what people were expecting a comic book to look like, so that the comic book audience tends to like material that doesn't really change but acts like it does, but returns home later on with for a hot cup of cocoa and a cookie. and that's just horse shit. So what ultimately develops in my relationship with Ken is that Ken goes on to get other work. People hire Ken on the basis of the work that he's done for me, but none of them seem to have the balls or understanding of what he's doing for me to get him to do anything other than conventional lettering for them. And that when he works with me, he has a level of freedom that is obviously liberating for him. Anecdotally, when we did the Divided States of Hysteria in 2017, I gave him a note on the script there was a phrase that was extended in culture, that internet chatter. I said, I need to find a way to convey the concept of internet chatter. What I was expecting was a button along the lines of an inset button comparable to the Go Gang alarms that were in Flagg.
Okay.
What I got instead was a graphic melange of gibberish and symbology that ran through all the pages that really enhanced the experience in a deep and profound way. And it's just like, what the f***? This is the joy of working with Ken Brusenay. And I'm going to say something about him that he knows full well. He's a raging pain in the ass. But I mean, seriously, I'm a pain in the ass, but I'm really charming about it. You know, Ken is just like, what? How could you say that? You know,
but you know, sometimes you got to work with pains in the asses.
Oh no,
they deal with me. You know.
Ken knows he has work as long as I'm still alive. He's got work.
What I had for you is like, when it comes to creative conflict, was there anybody that you butted heads with, but man, so out of that came like,
no,
Matt, really?
No, I win fights wherever I go.
I'm just curious.
I don't lose fights. No, I don't lose fights.
You seem like the type, but like
I don't lose fights. No, if I have a problem with someone, I win.
Okay. Undefeated in the
because I have no problem with walking away.
Okay.
Don't mention Ironwood or whatever.
No, I'm serious. I have no. I mean, it's not a joke. I'm quite serious. I don't believe in that turmoil creating excellence. No, I believe in peace.
Okay.
I mean, my editor, the guy who edits my stuff because when I went to work at Image at 12, I discovered to my shock there was no editorial oversight in Image. There's no one there to feedback, to respond to material. So I hired a guy whose day job is far more important than mine, than the work he does with me.
Right.
And every idea he has costs me time and money. But I would say 98% of those ideas are valid and should be enacted. I respect this guy enormously. He knows it. Okay. And the reason he's there is anecdotally. Okay. When we committed to do the third volume of Hey Kids Comics, I mapped it out. I start with a map always. Okay. Right. I'm working on my next project right now, and it's in that stage right now. I sent him the 6-issue map, and he said, I'm front loading too much old material. I need to address more contemporary. And I said, okay. Here's what you do: take a whack at my map. Come back to me with what you think it should be. Get a Word doc. Okay. And again, the map consists of a single sentence per page. Okay. Right. So it's 28, 24, 24, 24, 28. That's our breakdown, 6 of those. And what I got back read perfectly, and an indication of how good it was, that I wasn't aware of losing anything that I had in my first week.
Cool. Nice. That's beautiful. So now Flagg being what it was it immediately recognized as a sort of groundbreaking book at the time, or did it take some time?
Flagg was not a commercial success.
Right.
It simply sold better than anything sells today.
Yeah.
But in those days, I had no commercial impact whatsoever. The impact that Flagg had was on the guys who were reading the book, who became the talent pool the next decade and the next decade after that. Right. The audience didn't read the book. The problem is the comic book audiences have been infantilized by the comic code to so profound a degree that what you've got is now 50 and 60-year-old men who are disappointed by not being entertained by material that they've been waiting to see since they were 12. And they're wondering why at 60 they don't think they're not having the same enthusiastic reaction, or if they are, they should be questioning their own taste to work that made them love this material when they were children. The audience for comic books has been inoculated to accept certain structural realities. They are more interested in super dragons, mutant science, space, monster bullshit than they are in and they like pinups. They like they love Dave Stevens, who is a perfectly slick artist, who's a completely uninteresting comic book artist to me. They wax rhapsodic over rendering and have no interest in stories that are actually about potential possibilities. So the audience was one of the reasons why it's one of the three books of that era, The Dark Knight and Watchmen. And Watchmen, as transgressive as it was, still dressed itself in the language and visual imagery of a superhero comic book. And Dark Knight is an ideologically incoherent take on trying to convince you that Batman is both. It has it both ways. It's a Trump voter who voted for Obama last year. It's that kind of ideological incoherence.
Fascism for beginners.
But it's a grown man's interpretation of his own 12-year-old fantasies, which is the archetype of the comic book marketplace in the first place. Flagg was about something radically different. It looked different. It was difficult to read. It didn't make it easy for you. And frankly, I didn't give a shit. I'd like to have been more successful commercially and financially, but I recognize in retrospect that was not available to me.
Well, some of the way you portrayed the media or things in Flagg is actually, it's coming to pass now. I imagine some of those talking. Does that surprise you at all? Do you feel prophetic? Yeah. Or
Do I look surprised?
No. But like,
I mean, look.
Because
I'm going to say something you're not going to like.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Being the smartest man in the room in the comic book business is a really low bar.
It's true. No. I appreciate that because it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing because if you read that from '83, and it's happening now, it's like you could easily look at it being as prophetic, but
that's a false narrative.
But you're right.
I mean, Flagg is all those elements of the Flagg material are based on elements of culture and society that were present and available and identifiable in its time. They may have been nascent, they may have been incumbent, but they were there. In the same way, look. There's a media encouraged war between the generations of my generation, the Generation X, and millennials, and it's completely generated by media. And what I find most fascinating about it is what I realize is that Generation X and millennials are mocking of my generation for our ineptitude with technology, without ever acknowledging that technology was waiting for them when they poured out of the womb, as opposed to invented on the way out of the canal.
Right.
And that this technology was waiting for them when they got here, made by men and women of my age. And the profit, the commodifying of generational warfare, is of profound value to media, but it serves no one in any real way. It seemed to me that I wasn't being prophetic. I wanted to do a book that was dystopic but funny, that reflected my own standards and sensibilities at the time. At 30, and when I did it when I was 32, I was fuckable. I liked fucking. I was attractive. I liked underwear. I was obsessed with fashion. I was a real fashionista and a clothes horse. And it was just, and that was the icing on the cake of a dystopic narrative. And I mean, all the things I got right, I got plenty wrong too. But it doesn't matter. I wanted to do an entertainment that required some attention. And the problem is that the comic book audience is only willing to pay attention to stuff that supports and panders to their primary belief system. I've said it more than once. The structural narrative format, the armature, the structural template of American comic books is Roadrunner and Coyote cartoons. Mm-hmm. It's an endless pursuit with no closure, with the implication of change and adjustment, which is personified by Batman gaining and losing a yellow circle around his image, or around his emblem, or Spider-Man wearing a red or a black suit.
Right, exactly.
That's the extent of actual character development and adjustment.
So, it's funny you mentioned, and this sounds like this is a bizarre segue, but I had to mention.
I like a bizarre segue.
Good. So you're in the midst of almost finished with the third and final volume of Hey Kids Comics.
Yes.
And pastiche, I would say, of you is very present in this this volume. Yeah, you think so. And the sailor pants are phenomenal.
Those pants were Australian Navy pants, which you could buy. They were wool tweed, the wool twill. They were warm as shit. with 12 buttons.
Yeah.
They weren't American Navy pants.
Okay.
Because the American Navy pants came up here, they had 8 buttons. These were 12s. They were literally just under the rib cage, and they were a great blocker for you. They kept you packed. They kept the package in place, and they were a heavy wool, and they were great for New York winters. And they weren't flared. They were like 1920s box pants. They dropped. Okay, so they
well, Navy pants are made a certain way. You could cut this out, but they're made a certain way so that you could use them as flotation devices. It's true. You could ball up the. But anyway, so
these were made to kill Komodo dragons.
That's right. So now my question, with you being with a version of Howard,
the character's name is Noah Gitlin.
Now, with him being a present thing, does this lean more? Because you said from the beginning, the last time we spoke to you, that these stories are fictional but actually happened.
Well, what I said was a lot of this didn't happen, but it's still all true.
But it's still all true. Does this lean closer to? Is it closer to the thing, or is it the same?
No more nor less.
I was just wondering
there are conversations that are verbatim, but they're also always subjective because I'm writing them. But no, it's been that way from word one.
Yeah.
We're planning back matter for the trade that make Cleve a little closer to home.
Okay, excellent. That's exciting. That's for the trade of 3.
Well, there were 2 Noah Gitlin sequences in the second trade, which both of which are based on absolutely true incidents. If you haven't seen them, they're worth knowing about. Have you read them?
I have the floppies, so they're not.
Oh, you have?
Floppies. They're not in the floppies.
Well, in the first of them, I do. In 1981 or 82, I was at an Inkpot banquet in San Diego with my then wife, and Bob Kane was at the table with us.
Oh, God, all right.
And my wife, who is a sly and very funny woman, this is my second wife, was over his shoulder and looked at me from behind him and did, who the f*** is this guy? Lip syncing it very, very overtly, and it cracked me up, and I started laughing. And then, about 6 years ago, I was in New York City. I was on Mike Carbonara's shows, and I was at the Penn Central, the Hotel Maurice for Pimps, the Penn Central Hotel, and this is a branch of that hotel, by the way. And we'd gone to the theater, and we ran into Steranko as we were heading to our room. And my wife and Steranko were about the same height. And right at the same time, Steranko's facing me, and my wife's behind him. My wife goes, "Who the f*** is this guy?" And that was the inspiration for this 4-page piece.
He's going to be in Pittsburgh in a few months if you want to visit. Yeah,
lucky girl.
Slice your throat with his shoulder pads. They're so sharp.
I have one question about Hey Kids Comics, just because I always love the book, just because I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan, and I consider this book the comic book equivalent of Desolation Row, where you gave everybody the different names and changed their faces. But I always thought the coolest thing about doing that would be how did you decide what other people would look like? Like, you knew who they were in real life, or you were kind of combining them, but how did you give them there's a character he's Gil Kane, but how did you decide that's what this version of Gil Kane was going to look like?
In the same, it's kind of like when I used to go to shows years ago, when I first started getting on the road again, and I'd find myself at a table with colleagues I didn't particularly know, but whose work I knew but didn't know them personally, I would often say, "So who's going to play you in the movie?" Okay.
Great.
And that gives me a sense of how people think of themselves.
All right.
And I'm serious. And I thought about this book as if I were casting a movie about these people.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And Gil, Gil had Gil looked like an anti-Semitic movie poster as a young man, and he transformed himself. And that transformation, I just read. Paul Kupperberg posted a couple of pages of Alan Kupperberg's work. Alan was a failed comic book artist whose best work was screamingly hostile takes on his colleagues, like career-burning shit.
Right.
and he didn't know how to stop. You know, and it was just really good work. And he talks about the cruelty that was enacted on Gil after he had the nerve to attempt to rise above his station.
Okay.
You know, because comic book artists and writers embrace the idea of themselves as like soulless failures. You know, that bitterness inculcates. I mean, years ago, there's a thing in the third volume, which I different characterization, different cast, but it happened. I was at Marvel, and I was utterly in awe of Gray Morrow. I claim to not be in awe, but a phenomenal draftsman. But I was in awe of his work, and I ran into Mike Esposito, who was an incredibly bitter man. Oh yeah. Well, you know, look, he and Andrew had really serious ambitions in the early 50s.
Right.
Their imitation, their knockoff of Mad was the best of the bunch.
Yeah.
They should have been working for Kurtzman. They were that good. I mean, the writing wasn't as good, of course, but they were competitive with anybody Kurtzman had in the stable. They would have been great for war books with them. They would have been great for Mad. Okay. And they just recently surfaced the covers of the romance. They did 2 issues of a romance comic book with the covers that are absolutely gorgeous. An entirely different way of thinking about romance books. Just amazing looking stuff. So Mike was a pretty bitter guy. And we were talking about Gray Morrow. I was walking through the office, and I asked Mike whether he was a fan. And Mike looked at me with such contempt, such disdain, and he said the word fan with enough syllables in it as that, you know, what the f*** are you thinking? You know, it was just really, it was drenched with bitterness.
Well, yeah, we talked about on Facebook. You and I talked briefly about how one of your characters is Gladys Parker, like physically Gladys Parker,
but incorporates elements of Patricia Highsmith, of Flo Steinberg, of Tarpe Mills.
Now, were these all? Did you have personal interactions with these folks at all, or I mean, you would have been
some of them.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah,
you know, I mean, for example. I don't want to give anything away.
No, don't give anything away. Don't screw it. I don't need to know.
The character of Alfred Kessler is a conflation of 2 major players in comics. The front story of one and the back story of another.
Excellent. Okay.
You know, Ted Whitman is obviously Matt Baker, and there's also August, I forget his name, and a bit of Billy Graham, and also, you know, just all the other cross-ethnic guys. You know?
Yeah. You do his frustration so well. Just the way he's like, people say shit, and he's just kind of like, that quiet frustration. Because, you know,
he's the smartest man in the room and the most self-aware.
And I mean, Matt Baker was black and gay, I believe, doing Miss Fury. And
everything.
Phantom Lady.
Phantom Lady. Yeah, Miss Fury.
Larry Stroman just posted a piece on Facebook that he couldn't find any comic stuff, and I sent him to where he could find some. You know, I mean, Joe Procopio at Lost Art Press just published last year or two the Canteen Cake stuff by Matt Baker, and it's really good.
His work is gorgeous. I don't know why he doesn't do more work. Procopio's work is beautiful.
He did It Rhymes with Lust, which is one of the first graphic novels, and should have been bigger than it was.
Arnold Drake.
Arnold Drake, and they didn't have any. They didn't know how to market.
No, it's kind of like it's what happened to so many transcendent and revolutionary products get lost in the shuffle because no one knows how to sell the product.
Right.
What not to show? Not.
One other question I had for you is real quickly. So the Alex Toth story never happened, right? No. Like he never held a publisher out of a window.
No. The reason you know it never happened is that everybody's got a different version of who it was and when.
Okay.
It's just nonsense. But it is so engraved into the mythos that it had to be told.
Right.
And the way I told it, I'm very proud of.
Right.
And that I made it a joke about Bob Rose and Brian Callahan.
And honestly, that is why I never want to know who these people are in Hey Kids Comics, because I love the fact that you can.
It's obvious that Gil is Ray.
Yes.
It's obvious that Sid Mitchell is Jack Kirby. Bob Rose is Stan Lee. Morris Edelstein is Martin Goodman. And Jess Mayberg is obviously Kanigher.
Okay.
You know, and Milt Konigsberg is a cross between Mort Weisinger and Julie Schwartz.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, but there's a lot of crossovers, and the new volume will lose me friends.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it'll gain you some friends. I love it.
No. There are people who can never speak to me again, or will confront me in person if they have any balls about what I've done in the third volume.
Yeah.
Particularly, I'm serious.
The next couple issues are bangers. Atom bombs.
Issue 4. When I posted a couple of pages from issue 4, and Mike Gold's reaction was, "Uh-oh."
Yeah. It's 6 again, right? It's going to be 6.
Yeah.
So what's in the pipe after that?
I'm 20 pages into a 96-page breakdown, adapting the fifth of a series of novels that were published in the mid-60s to the early 70s, back when there was public transportation and people read more, called Fargo. They're quasi-westerns, but they're actually rip-snorting adventure stories. Imagine if Alistair MacLean was writing about an American hero in the early part of the 20th century. They take place, the hero is a veteran of Roosevelt's Rough Riders, who's a confidant of Teddy Roosevelt after his presidency. He's a rascal, an ex-boxer, gunman, gunslinger, and it's a lot of fun. I've got it all broken down, page broken down, now I'm in panel breakdown mode. So I did 20 pages on the train.
So yeah, that brings me to one question I almost forget that we wanted to ask you. What's like an average? What's a typical day like? I know that you don't do full page art anymore. We just mentioned
I don't work time. I work mission.
Okay.
I generally lay my work plan out in such a way that this must be done today. Okay. And for example, I get home on Tuesday, and on Tuesday I will drive over to my assistant's place and pick up the 28 pages of inked panel borders for issue 6 of Hey Kids Comics. I work, no matter what I do on the page, I always work into inked panel borders. He has the thumbnails, he's inked the panel borders, they're ready to go. So I'll pick them up as early as possible. I probably won't get much done on Tuesday, but on Wednesday I will start. I'll take pages 1 through 12, because the last 4 pages are a coda. So it's 1 through 12, then 13 through 24, and then I'll work 25 through 28. 3 separate elements. And my assistant also has all the fake comic book covers that we're doing. He's got those set up, and some BGs. And Ken has the builds that he needs to do. There are things that he has to build CGI that'll be available to me. So I'll start penciling on Wednesday morning in all likelihood. So I'll pencil.
Some of those covers are tremendous. I love the one with the kid that's wearing the Superman cape and he's face down in the middle of his lawn.
Come on, it's an iconic image.
It
right?
is.
I like the one
we
with
all tried it at one point, whether it was a tree or a...
that's all Don Cameron. I basically gave Don rough comps. I took that photograph. That's my grandson.
Okay.
My other grandson, and he was game. He was a sport. I said, "Do you want to put a towel under your face?" And he said, "No, I'll do it." He was right face down there. Don literally, we couldn't find a pair of high tops for him, so Don photoshopped the high tops, and he was wearing more much modern sneakers.
Right.
Luckily, he's got a marine haircut, so it works pretty good.
Yeah, it works.
And Don added the CG, the gutters that are lying across his ankles are CGI. He added them in. Wait till you see the cover of issues 5 and 6.
Yeah, I like the refrigerator box of comics. That was
that's
touching.
real.
That was touching. Yeah.
That's real.
Well, that's.
I'm old, man. It's like.
Well, I think I've bent your ear long enough. I warned you I was going to.
It's okay.
But I appreciate it as always. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mikey. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And now I'm going to see if I can get you doing a song.
All right.
I'm going to videotape you if you don't mind.
All right.
And because you do love musical theater, and you had a lovely singing voice. So.
If they asked me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot is just to tell them that I love you a lot. And the world discovers as my book ends how to make true lovers of friends. And I thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much.
Oh, I was just channeling my high school musical experience there. Look, be a lady tonight.
I know, right? I have to ask the next time we see Howard whether or not he actually did musical theater at some point or wanted to do musical theater or something, because, man, he's got the chops. I won't lie. Like, that was That was awesome. And I don't know any other podcast that you're going to kind of get that stuff on, except for the Last Comic Shop podcast. And we hope that you are sticking around for more of our fantastic interviews. And you can make sure that you never miss any of them by rate, reviewing, and subscribing over at our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. It's a terrific place where you can find all of these episodes, past and present, where we've done terrific interviews with a whole slew of folks, whether it was Mark Russell or Roy Thomas or Dennis Culver or Kelly Thompson or Russ Braun.
Any of the Pat Olive interviews. This year, last year, the Howard Chaykin interviews. You had this one. We have old ones. There's all kinds of interviews out there.
So make sure that you're checking all of them out. They're all evergreen, and they're out there on our website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com.
Yes, that's right. You want to go there. That is the home base. We've got links to this week's social media of the month type thing. Is it Twitter? Is it X? Is it who knows what it's going to be next week? We're somewhere on the big World Wide Web. You can find us. We also have links to a merch store, T-shirts, tote bags, coffee mugs, all sorts of gifts that you might want for your comic-loving friends or fans.
Something to wear next time you make it out to Broadway.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that J.A. can wear so he can take off that Conan shirt. Oh, God. It still reeks.
It is a Conan the Barbarian shirt. It's supposed to smell like that. He's a barbarian.
Oh, man. But make sure that you're sticking around next week. We won't have interviews, but we will have a review of Long Shot. Yes, the 6-part miniseries featuring recent addition to the Eisner Hall of Fame, Ann Nesenti. Yay! As well as Art Adams. I mean, I think
you can't beat Art Adams. He's wonderful.
So that'll be on next week's show. And until then, I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Jay Scott and Chad Smith. And we hope that you stay safe, stay going to cons, because there are lots of great ones out there and fantastic people to meet. And remember that an email's least favorite food is always spam. No, that's terrible.
They're all terrible.
The Last Comic Shop was a 2023 Black Angus production.